Your brother needs it more, Dad decided for everyone. They started packing my things without asking. I waited for the court order to arrive. The sheriff knocked at 9 a.m. sharp. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a command issued over Sunday coffee. My father, Robert, didn't even look at me. He just gestured around the penthouse loft I had restored with my own hands and gave it away to my brother. Joshua was already wrapping my grandmother's vase in newspaper. They thought my silence was submission. They didn't know silence was just me waiting for the ammo to load. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I stood up from the floral couch, the one I had bought with my first bonus check, and walked toward the hallway. My mother, Helen, was fluttering around the kitchen island, nervously wiping down surfaces that were already clean. She caught my eye and offered a weak, trembling smile. "It's just for a little while, Morgan," she said, her voice pitching up the way it always did when she was trying to convince herself of a lie, "until Joshua gets back on his feet. You're so independent. You can make a home anywhere. Joshua, he needs a foundation." I didn't respond. I didn't blink. I just turned and walked into my home office, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I turned the deadbolt. Click. That sound was the distinct dividing line between their delusion and my reality. Most people in my position would be hyperventilating. They would be screaming, throwing things, or dialing their best friend to sob about the betrayal. I leaned back against the door and checked my pulse on my wrist. 62 beats per minute, steady, calm, cold. For years, I had treated my family with the soft logic of emotion. I had assumed that if I was competent, helpful, and quiet, I would earn their respect. I realized now that I had been operating on a currency they didn't recognize. My compassion hadn't been an investment. It had been a luxury they had overdrafted for a decade. The floor safe was concealed beneath the rug in the corner. Kneeling down, I spun the dial. Left to 10, right to 34, left to 18. The mechanism released with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, there was no jewelry. There were no stacks of cash. There was only paper. I pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope labeled Kensington Title, Deed of Trust. I sat at my drafting table and slid the documents out. The language was beautiful in its absolute rigidity. Fee simple, absolute. Transferred from Silas Moore to Morgan Moore. 4 years ago. Not to the Moore Family Trust. Not to Robert Moore. To me. My father, the failed entrepreneur who treated every family dinner like a board meeting he was chairing, believed he controlled this building because he controlled the narrative. He assumed that because Grandpa Silas was old, he was senile. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was submissive. He was wrong on both counts. Reaching for my phone, I ignored the contacts for Mom and Joshua. I dialed the number for Patricia, my real estate attorney. She answered on the second ring. "Morgan? It's Sunday. They made the move," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, metallic, stripped of any daughterly warmth. "Robert just gave me 30 days' notice. They want the penthouse for Joshua and Brittany." Patricia let out a sharp, professional sigh. "Okay. Do you want me to send the cease and desist regarding the ownership? We can nip this in the bud by 5 p.m. today. I can have a courier there in an hour." I looked through the glass panel of my office door. In the living room, I saw Joshua holding my grandmother's vintage crystal vase. He tossed it casually from one hand to the other, laughing at something Brittany was saying. He didn't care about the history of this place. He just wanted the address. "No," I said. "If we stop them now, they'll spin it. Dad will claim it was a misunderstanding. He'll play the victim. He'll say he was just trying to manage family resources." I watched Joshua put his feet up on my coffee table, boots still on. I need them to commit. I need them to vacate their current lease. I need them to hire the movers. I need them to stand on this porch with nowhere else to go. "Morgan," Patricia warned, "that is the nuclear option. That burns the bridge down to the pilings." "I'm not burning the bridge, Patricia," I replied, watching a clump of mud fall from Joshua's boot onto my Persian rug. "I'm just charging the toll they refused to pay." Prepare the eviction protocol for trespassers. We execute on moving day. Understood, she said. I'll draft the paperwork. Do not interfere with their packing. Let them document their own intent to trespass. Consider me a ghost, I said, and hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of my family dismantling my life. I didn't feel sad. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. They wanted a war for the legacy. They just didn't realize the war was already over. I had won it 4 years ago. My father saw the Kensington brownstone as a number. Specifically, $2.6 million. That was the current market appraisal. He looked at the bay windows and the refinished mahogany woodwork and saw a retirement fund he could liquidate or leverage. He saw the asset. He never saw the sweat. To understand why I wasn't crying in my office, you have to understand what this building looked like 5 years ago. It wasn't a pristine historic landmark. It was a rotting carcass in a neighborhood the city had forgotten. Grandpa Silas had bought it for $420,000 when everyone else was fleeing the district. My father had called him a senile old fool. It's a money pit, Pop, Robert had sneered at Sunday dinner. You're throwing good money after bad. Sell it for scraps. Robert never lifted a finger. He didn't know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition, but I did. While my brother Joshua was finding himself on beaches in Cabo and burning through his trust fund in Ibiza, I was here. I was 24 years old, wearing a 95 mask and covered in 80 years of drywall dust. This is the part my family conveniently forgot. The silent work protocol. It wasn't just writing checks. It was physical, brutal labor. I spent my weekends scraping black mastic off the original oak floors until my knuckles bled. I hauled sheets of drywall up 4 flights of narrow stairs because the service elevator was broken. I negotiated with electrical contractors at 6 a.m. before heading to my actual job at the architecture firm. I learned the city's zoning code better than the clerks at City Hall. I put $85,000 of my own money into this place, my entire savings, every bonus, every spare dime. I didn't buy designer bags. I bought copper piping and slate roofing tiles. I breathed life back into this building while my father sat in his country club complaining that Grandpa was wasting the inheritance. That was why, 4 years ago, Grandpa Silas called me to the hospital. It was a Tuesday. The cancer was aggressive, but his mind was sharp as a diamond. My father had visited earlier that morning, spending 20 minutes talking about his own failed business ventures before leaving for a golf tea time. I sat by the bed, holding Grandpa's hand. His skin was like paper, but his grip was iron. "Open the drawer, Morgan," he whispered. I pulled out a blue folder. Inside was a deed of transfer. "I know what your father is," Grandpa said, his voice raspy but clear. "He thinks he's a businessman. He's a gambler who always loses. If this building goes into the family trust, Robert will mortgage it within a month. He'll strip the equity to pay for his mistakes, and he'll lose it to the bank within a year." I looked at the document. It transferred the property fully and irrevocably to me. Not as a trustee, as the owner. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who knows which floorboards creak," he said, managing a weak smile. "You put your blood into that stone, Morgan. You respect the work. Robert sees a piggy bank. You see a legacy." He squeezed my hand. "Don't tell him. Not yet. Let him think he's in charge. If he knows it's yours, he'll make your life hell while I'm dying. Promise me." "I promise," I said. I signed the papers. His attorney filed them the next morning. Grandpa died 2 weeks later. For 4 years, I kept that promise. I let Robert play the big man, the trustee, the manager who never actually managed anything. I paid the property taxes. I handled the tenant disputes. I maintained the insurance. I let him believe he was the king of the castle because it kept the peace. But peace was over now. Sitting in my office, listening to them pack my life into cardboard boxes, I realized the irony. They weren't evicting a tenant. They were trying to evict the architect from her own design. And just like Grandpa predicted, Robert hadn't bothered to check the foundation before he tried to swing the wrecking ball. The 30-day countdown began the next morning. If silence was my shield, compliance was my weapon. I initiated what military strategists call a false surrender. In high-conflict negotiations, when you cannot win by force immediately, you feign weakness. You let the enemy advance so deep into your territory that they expose their supply lines. You let them feel safe. Joshua and Brittany arrived on Tuesday with a confident, almost aggressive cheerfulness. They let themselves in with the spare key. Robert had given them a key that technically violated my lease terms, but pointing that out now would spoil the surprise. "Oh, wow," Brittany said, spinning around in the center of the living room. She was holding a massive ring of fabric swatches. "It's smaller than I remembered, but the light is good." I stood by the kitchen island, sipping black coffee. "It's 2,000 square feet, Brittany. It's the largest unit in the district." She waved a dismissive hand. "Well, once we get rid of this heavy wood, it'll feel bigger. We're thinking of painting all this mahogany white, like a crisp gallery white. To modernize it," my hand tightened around my mug. The heavy wood was original, hand-carved Honduran mahogany from 1905. I had spent 3 months stripping 8 layers of lead paint off it with a heat gun and dental picks. Painting it white was a crime against architecture. "That sounds ambitious," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Joshua needs a space that reflects his brand," she continued, walking over to the fireplace, my fireplace, and tapping a nail against the mantel. "Tech-forward, minimalist. This feels a bit grandfather's library." "It was grandfather's library," I noted. "Right, but we're looking forward, not back," Joshua chimed in, walking out of the bedroom. He was holding a tape measure. "Hey, Morgan, quick question. This wall between the office and the living room, is it load-bearing? We want to knock it out to make an open-concept gaming lounge." I looked at the wall. It was structural brick. Knocking it out without a steel beam reinforcement would cause the 3rd floor to collapse into the 2nd. "I wouldn't recommend that," I said calmly. "But you can measure whatever you like." "Cool," Joshua said, ignoring the warning. He snapped the tape measure. "We're bringing the contractors in next week to give quotes. Dad said he'd cover the renovations from the building's maintenance fund." Of course he did. Robert was already spending my money that didn't exist in the trust account he thought he controlled. Walking over to the hook by the door, I pulled off my set of keys. Not the master set, just the copy I used for the dog walker. "Here," I said, holding them out to Joshua. He looked surprised, then smug. He took them, weighing them in his palm like gold coins. "Thanks, Morgs," he said, flashing that boyish grin that had gotten him out of every speeding ticket and failed exam in his life. "I know this is tough, but honestly, you'll be happier in a smaller place. Less maintenance. You know, you can focus on your work." "Right," I said. "My work." I watched them for the next hour. I let them put blue painter's tape on the floors to mark where their sectional sofa would go. I let Brittany hold up paint chips against the mahogany. I let them plan the destruction of my home. Every piece of tape they laid down was evidence. Every measurement they took was proof of their intent. By handing them the keys, I hadn't surrendered the apartment. I had handed them the rope. They were so busy measuring the walls for paint, they didn't realize the walls were already closing in. "We'll treat it well," Brittany said as they left, clutching her fabric swatches. "I know you will," I lied. "See you on moving day." I locked the door behind them. Then I went to the fireplace, ran my hand over the dark, smooth wood they wanted to paint white, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk voluntarily into a cage. 3 days before the deadline, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from Robert. Subject: transition finalization. Location: his home office. I put on my best blazer, charcoal gray, sharp shoulders, and drove to my parents' house. The mood in the room was celebratory, bordering on smug. Robert sat behind his oversized mahogany desk, the one he'd bought to look like a CEO, even though his office was just a room where he paid bills and made bad investments. Joshua and Brittany were on the leather sofa. scrolling through furniture catalogs. Mom hovered with a tray of iced tea. Glad you could make it. Morgan, Robert said, not looking up from a stack of papers. We need to wrap up the administrative details. I've taken the liberty of finding you a place. He slid a glossy brochure across the desk. The Riverview Gardens. I didn't pick it up. I knew the place. It was a glorified dorm on the edge of town, thin walls, beige carpets, and a view of the interstate. It's a sublet, Robert explained. Efficiency studio. Reasonable rent. I've already spoken to the landlord. He's a friend from the club. He's willing to bypass the credit check since I'm vouching for you. Vouching for me, I repeated slowly. I have a 790 credit score, Dad. I own my own firm. It's just easier this way. He waved his hand dismissively. Here's the lease. Sign it, and we can transfer the utility accounts for the brownstone to Joshua by Monday. He pushed a pen toward me. It was a Mont Blanc. He loved expensive props. I looked at the pen, then at the lease for the shoebox apartment, then at Joshua, who was showing Brittany a $5,000 gaming chair on his phone. I won't be signing that, I said. The room went quiet. Robert blinked, his face reddening slightly. Excuse me? I'm not moving to Riverview, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not transferring the utilities. Robert sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a man dealing with a petulant child. Morgan, we have discussed this. The decision has been made. The family needs the brownstone. You are single. Joshua is building a future. Do not make this difficult. I'm not making it difficult, I said. I'm making it legal. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out a single, crisp envelope embossed with the logo of Chin and Associates, Real Estate Law. I slid it across the desk, right on top of his brochure. This is a notice to cease and desist, I said. It states that you have no legal authority to terminate my residency, no authority to enter the premises, and absolutely no authority to transfer tenancy to Joshua. Robert stared at the envelope. He didn't open it. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Lawyers? You brought lawyers into a family discussion? He shook his head, looking at Mom. This is what I'm talking about. Helen. She's hysterical. He looked back at me. His eyes hard. I am the trustee of the Moore family estate. I manage all assets, including that building. Your little letter doesn't override my authority, Morgan. I decide who lives where. Actually, I said, standing up, the deed decides. And if you had bothered to read the trust documents any time in the last 4 years, you'd know that the building isn't in the trust. Of course it is, Robert snapped. Grandpa put everything in the trust. Check the amendment from August 2019, I said. Or don't, it doesn't matter to me. But if anyone attempts to remove my property or change my locks on Monday, it will be treated as criminal trespass and theft. I turned to leave. Sit down, Robert roared, slamming his hand on the desk. I stopped at the door. I didn't turn around. You have until 9 a.m. Monday to read that letter, Dad. I suggest you do. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Robert's voice, loud and mocking. She's bluffing. She's just trying to scare us. Joshua, call the movers. We stick to the plan. He didn't open the envelope. He just pushed it aside. He was so confident in his power that he couldn't see the cliff he was driving off. Friday morning wasn't a reprieve. It was an escalation. I was in my home office, reviewing blueprints for a client. When my phone rang, it was Patricia again. Usually, her tone was dry and procedural. Today, it was sharp. Morgan, are you sitting down? I'm working, Patricia. What is it? I ran a standard title lock and inquiry check on the brownstone this morning, just to make sure Robert hadn't tried to file any falsified quitclaim deeds. She paused, the silence heavy with implication. He didn't file a deed. He filed a loan application. I stopped typing. A loan application? For what? A cash-out refinance, Patricia said. $1.5 million, high interest, private lender. The kind of place you go when the banks won't touch you. I stared at the phone. My father wasn't just trying to reshuffle housing assignments. He was trying to strip the equity out of the building. He can't do that, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He doesn't own it. He knows that, Patricia replied. But the lender doesn't. He submitted the application listing the Moore family trust as the owner and himself as the sole trustee. He falsified the statement of assets. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The rush to evict me, the refusal to discuss it, the urgency for Joshua to move in immediately. It wasn't about the baby. It wasn't about Joshua needing a foundation. He needs the appraisal, I realized aloud. That's why he needs me out by Monday. Exactly, Patricia confirmed. If an appraiser walks through that building and asks the current resident who owns the property, the gig is up. You'd show them the deed, and the loan would be denied instantly. But if Joshua is living there? Joshua. Who thinks Dad is in charge? Joshua lets the appraiser in, nods along, and Dad walks away with $1.5 million of your equity. And then what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. And then? Patricia said grimly, Robert defaults on the loan in 6 months because he's broke. The lender forecloses. The building gets auctioned off. You lose everything. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was a felony. My father was willing to burn down my future to cover his own past failures. He was using Joshua as a prop to stage a robbery. He's not protecting the family, I said, looking at the photo of Grandpa Silas on my desk. He's liquidating it. Morgan, Patricia said. This changes the strategy. This isn't just a civil dispute about tenancy. This is attempted mortgage fraud. We need to stop this hard. No, I said. The anger was gone, replaced by a crystalline focus. We don't just stop it. We let him walk right up to the edge. Morgan, he thinks he's a genius, I cut in. He thinks he's outsmarted everyone. If we stop him now, he'll just try again with a different lender or a different lie. I need to expose him. Completely. Publicly. What do you want to do? Let the sheriff serve the papers on Monday, I said. When he shows up expecting to move Joshua in and cash out my building, I want him to realize he hasn't just lost the apartment. I want him to realize he's lost the con. I hung up. I looked around the room, the walls I had sanded, the floors I had saved. My father looked at this place and saw a lifeline for his drowning ego. I looked at it and saw the only thing that mattered, the truth. And on Monday morning, the truth was going to hurt. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch. The sky was a sharp, biting blue. I stood by the bay window on the second floor, a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching the street below. At 8:58, a large yellow rental truck rumbled down the cobblestones. Joshua was driving. Brittany was in the passenger seat, feet up on the dashboard, scrolling on her phone. They parked right in front of the fire hydrant. Typical. Joshua hopped out, wearing a New York City t-shirt that looked brand new. He jogged up the steps, whistling. He pulled out the key. I had given him the key to the old locks. I heard the metal slide into the cylinder. Then, silence. Then, a jiggle. Then, a rattle. I sipped my coffee. I had paid the locksmith $300 on Saturday afternoon to rekey the entire building. The key in Joshua's hand was nothing more than a piece of scrap metal. He frowned, pulling it out and jamming it back in. He started pounding on the door. Morgan, the key's stuck. Open up. At 8:59, Robert's leased Mercedes swung around the corner. He parked behind the truck, blocking the entire lane. He got out, checking his watch. He looked stressed. He needed this move to happen fast. The appraiser for his fraudulent loan was probably scheduled for noon. What's the holdup? Robert yelled, marching up the stairs. She changed the locks, Dad, Joshua whined. She's locking us out. Robert's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He started hammering on the wood with his fist. Morgan, open this door immediately. You are in violation of a direct order from the trustee. I will have the police drag you out. Be careful what you wish for, I whispered to the empty room. At 9 o'clock sharp, A black SUV with county markings turned onto the street. It didn't use sirens. It didn't need to. It pulled up alongside the Mercedes. Robert turned, a smug smile breaking through his anger. He thought he had won. He thought I was being arrested. He actually waved the deputy over. "Officer!" Robert shouted, pointing at my door. "Thank God you're here. My tenant is refusing to vacate the premises. I need you to break this door down." I opened the door. I didn't step out. I just stood in the threshold, holding my coffee. The deputy sheriff, a large man named Officer Miller who had known Grandpa Silas, walked up the steps. He ignored Robert's outstretched hand. "Are you Robert Moore?" Miller asked. "Yes. I am the owner and trustee," Robert said, puffing out his chest. "And this girl is trespassing. Actually," Miller said, reaching into his vest, "I'm here to serve a trespass notice. Robert Moore, Joshua Moore, you are hereby ordered to vacate the property at 1247 Westbrook immediately." Robert froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was a vacuum of silence where his ego used to be. "This is a mistake," Robert stammered, his confidence cracking. "I control the trust. She's just the daughter. She doesn't own anything. I've reviewed the title." "Mr. Moore," Miller said, his voice bored and heavy. "The deed was transferred to Morgan Moore 4 years ago. Sole owner, fee simple. The paperwork is in order. You have no authority here." This was the moment. The narcissistic injury. It wasn't just that he had lost. It was that he had been irrelevant for 4 years and hadn't known it. I watched the realization hit him. He wasn't the patriarch. He wasn't the tycoon. He was just a man with a mountain of debt standing on his daughter's porch. He looked at me. For the first time in my life, he didn't look down at me. He looked afraid. He knew that I knew about the loan. He knew the appraisal wasn't happening. He knew his financial house of cards was about to collapse. "Morgan," he said, his voice trembling, "you can't do this. The family, we need this." "The family needed a leader," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I looked at Joshua. Joshua looked at Dad, waiting for orders, but Dad was staring at the ground, broken. Joshua got in the truck without a word. Officer Miller stayed on the sidewalk until they drove away. Robert didn't look back. He got into his Mercedes and drove off to face a bankruptcy I wasn't going to bail him out of. I went back inside and locked the door. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a sound that felt like finality. There were no tears. There was no victory lap. I simply returned to my desk and opened my laptop. I blocked their numbers: Mom, Dad, Joshua, Brittany, one by one. Delete, block, erase. The silence that filled the brownstone wasn't lonely. It was rich. It was the sound of equity compounding. It was the sound of a legacy that was finally safe. 2 years later, the building is worth $3.2 million. I run my architecture firm from the ground floor unit. I still drink my coffee in the bay window every morning. Sometimes I wonder where they ended up, but then I look at the mahogany woodwork I saved, and I realize I don't care. They wanted the golden egg, but they tried to kill the goose. Now, I fly alone. Have you ever had to be the villain to save yourself? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more stories of justice served.